My name is Captain Rachel Morgan, United States Army Civil Affairs. The phone on my kitchen counter wouldn't stop buzzing, a frantic, relentless vibration against the worn maple wood. The screen lit up again, 11 missed calls from Mom, 6 from Dad, and now a flashing warning that my voicemail was full. I leaned back against the counter and took a slow sip of cold water, letting it ring. They were calling from Cancun, probably thinking they had every right to scream at me. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that their comfortable little world had already been dismantled. Their credit cards were now useless plastic. Their bank accounts were frozen solid. And a legal process was already in motion that would remove them from the lifestyle they treated as a birthright. They probably thought this was just another messy family argument. They had no idea this was a tactical execution of my grandfather's final wishes. Only 24 hours earlier, I had stepped off a red-eye flight from Kuwait, still carrying the faint smell of diesel and desert dust in my uniform. I'd come home without warning, hoping to surprise my grandmother in person before anyone could ruin the moment. But the moment I opened the front door of my childhood home in Savannah, Georgia, I knew something was wrong. The air was too still. Too heavy. It was the kind of silence that feels like the house itself is holding its breath. I dropped my duffel in the hallway and walked deeper into the house, my combat boots echoing on the hardwood. Each step felt heavier than the last, dread curling in my stomach like barbed wire. When I reached the back bedroom, I found her. Grandma Eleanor was lying in a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of mildew and stale air. The once vibrant woman who taught me how to bait a hook and bake peach cobbler now looked like a pale shadow of herself. Her breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest almost imperceptible. Then I saw it. On her nightstand sat a full glass of water, beads of condensation sliding down the side, just inches from her hand, but completely out of reach. That single detail shattered me more than any battlefield wound ever could. It was a silent portrait of neglect. A hot wave of anger surged up my spine. I pulled out my phone. I didn't have to dig far. There it was, plastered on Facebook for the whole world to see. My parents, Daniel and Karen Morgan, tanned and laughing in front of turquoise waves, holding fruity drinks with little umbrellas. The caption read, "Another perfect day in paradise. #YOLO #Cancun life." The contrast between their smiling faces and my grandmother's frail figure in that dark, airless room hit me like a sniper round. They were toasting their best life while the woman who had sacrificed everything for this family was being left to fade away alone. They had forgotten the first rule my grandfather ever taught me. Duty comes before desire. They had defaulted on their most sacred duty, and in my world, dereliction of duty has consequences. I tucked the blanket tighter around Grandma Eleanor, kissed her forehead, and promised her silently. They will never get away with this. To understand why I acted the way I did, you have to know what kind of family I grew up in. The Morgans weren't just a family, we were a solar system. And at the center of it was my older brother Tyler, the golden boy whose charm could sell air to a drowning man. Tyler had grand ideas. Most of them burned out faster than cheap fireworks, but our parents always swooped in to cushion the fall. He tried a sports podcast, a custom surfboard company, despite living 3 hours from the nearest decent wave, and most recently, an app for people who wanted to share dog walking experiences with strangers. It was a doomed project from the start, but that never stopped Mom and Dad from acting like he was the next Steve Jobs. The rest of us? We were expected to quietly orbit around Tyler's glow, reflecting it, never competing with it. The last time I saw all of them before my deployment was at what was supposed to be my farewell dinner. We'd gathered at a trendy seafood place on River Street in Savannah, the kind of spot where the menus don't list prices and the waiters wear bow ties. I'd hoped, just this once, the focus might be on me. It wasn't. Halfway through the appetizers, Tyler made his announcement. He'd secured a $15,000 seed investment from one of Dad's golfing buddies for his dog-walking social network. Mom clasped her hands like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. Dad beamed, already talking about how they could help him scale the idea. I stirred my sweet tea, trying to keep my voice steady as I told them about my upcoming role in Iraq. I wasn't just deploying. I'd be leading a civil affairs team responsible for rebuilding water systems, overseeing millions in aid, and ensuring villages could function after years of instability. My father gave me that tight, patient smile I'd seen my whole life. "That's nice, sweetheart," he said, patting my hand like I'd just told him I'd learned to bake cookies. "Just don't get your uniform too dirty. Hate to see you spend all that college on playing in the sand." I smiled back, but inside I filed those words away like an intelligence report. Because 6 months later, I'd be in a sweltering tent outside Mosul, stopping a $4 million aid project from being siphoned into a warlord's pocket, and not one member of my family would ever hear about it. That night in Iraq, when the room was thick with tension and the stakes were life or death, my commanding officer, Colonel Whitaker, gave me a single nod of approval after I'd presented the case for freezing those funds. It was the kind of nod my father had never given me. The kind that said, "I see you. I trust you. You're the right person for this job." And it reminded me of someone else who had always seen me for who I was, my grandfather, James Morgan Sr. Grandpa James was a self-made man from rural North Carolina. He'd built a small but solid shipping company from nothing but grit and a beat-up truck. He'd once told me, "Wretch, your dad sees the price of everything and the value of nothing. That's why I trust you with what really matters." I didn't know it at the time, but those words were more than a compliment. They were instructions. And the day I found Grandma Eleanor gasping alone in that dark room, I realized they were also permission. When I returned from Iraq, I didn't walk into a family squabble. I walked into a mission. And like any mission, it started with intel. My parents weren't just guilty of emotional neglect. They had ignored my grandfather's explicit care plan for my grandmother. And if I could prove it, I could activate what Grandpa James had quietly built into his estate years earlier, a clause that would strip my parents of all authority and give it to me. In my world, that's called a decisive action point. The countdown had begun. Do you want me to go straight into part 3, where Rachel opens the hidden safe and finds her grandfather's kill switch document? That's where the operation truly starts. 5000. ChatGPT. Part 3. The Orders in the Wall. I tucked Grandma Eleanor in and set a glass of water within easy reach, then moved through the house with the same deliberate calm I used before a raid. Anger is gasoline. Purpose is the match. I needed both. Grandpa James's study still smelled like cedar and pipe tobacco, even though he'd been gone 2 years. The afternoon light fell in clean rectangles across the old desk, the kind of desk that made you sit straighter. On the shelf was the fishing photo he loved, me at 12, gap-toothed and triumphant, holding a bass almost as big as my forearm while he grinned like I'd landed the moon. He told me once, "If the day ever comes when duty gets confused in this family, you'll know where to look." I'd thought it was a metaphor. Turned out it was a map. The third shelf creaked when I pulled it. I braced my boots, leaned in, and the entire bookcase slid an inch, then another. Behind it, sunk flush into the plaster, was a steel safe the color of storm water. Not new. Heavy. Stubborn. Like the man who'd bought it. The combination wasn't written anywhere. It didn't need to be. I spun the dial to 0716, July 16th, the night he'd taught me to cast into the cove without snagging the reeds. The tumblers clicked like distant thunder. The handle turned. Inside wasn't money. It was an arsenal of paper. On top lay the will, crisp, thick stock, the kind of document that announces itself. Below it, durable powers of attorney, health and financial, naming my father, Daniel, as primary agent. My jaw tightened until I read the next line, successor agent, Captain Rachel Morgan. There were tabs, color-coded and dated, like a battle plan laid out for a junior officer. I kept reading. A sealed envelope, notarized, with my grandfather's tight block letters across the front, a fiduciary negligence, execution protocol. My pulse hammered. I slit it carefully with my Gerber. Inside was a 3-page directive, written in plain English and the kind of legalese that turns steel into handcuffs. Grandpa had anticipated exactly this scenario: neglect, mismanagement of funds intended for Grandma's care, and any attempt to repurpose a trust assets toward lifestyle expenditures. If those conditions were met, and the document spelled out how to prove them, all authority would transfer to the successor agent immediately and irrevocably. No hearings. No grandstanding. Just a clean, cold switch. At the bottom was a note, short as a command. Rachel. If you're reading this, it means I was right to worry. Act fast. Be kind to your grandmother. Be firm with everyone else. J. I sat with that for a beat, the room a quiet drum. Then I got up and went hunting for proof. The family inbox was a mess. Vacation confirmations, restaurant reservations, Tyler's a pitch decks. But the care folder was immaculate. Grandpa had set up private nursing through Magnolia Home Health and prepaid 2 full years. There were invoices, receipts, even thank you notes from nurses who said Grandma liked gospel radio and lemon tea. Then the pattern broke. 2 months after Grandpa's death, an email from Mom to Magnolia. He will be discontinuing in-home services to manage finances more directly. Attached, a cancellation form signed Karen Morgan. Next, a bank statement from the long-term care account. I traced the highlight line with my finger. $18,500 transfer to D&K Family Experiences, LLC, a new entity I'd never seen before, with a memo line, a summer travel bundle. I didn't need a detective badge to translate that. I took photos. Screenshot everything. Pulled metadata like I was prepping an evidentiary packet for a field tribunal. And because the universe loves a smoking gun, there was one more tab, social. My parents, bronze and beaming on a hotel balcony, tagged at a resort in Cancun. Time-stamped 2:14 p.m. On the day the paramedics' report said Grandma was likely alone and dehydrated by mid-afternoon. I exhaled, slow and steady. The requirements in Grandpa's protocol weren't abstract anymore. They were dates, signatures, dollar amounts, and the cold color of neglect. Time to call the lawyer. I stepped onto the back porch for better reception and dialed Marisol Delgado, the estate attorney Grandpa trusted because she'd never once laughed at his old-school fountain pens or his insistence on hard copies. She answered on the second ring. Delgado Lore. Ms. Delgado, this is Captain Rachel Morgan. I'm at my grandparents' home in Savannah. I've located the safe and the sealed protocol. I have documented evidence of cancelled nursing care, improper transfers from the long-term account, and corroborating social timestamps. I'm invoking the successor agent clause under the fiduciary negligence protocol, effective immediately. There was a heartbeat of silence. Then her voice took on the clipped cadence of someone stepping into a familiar role. Understood, Captain. I'll initiate notices to the custodial banks and the trust administrator. You'll receive 2 secure emails, one to countersign, one to upload exhibits. Do you have authority to place emergency care orders? Yes. I've already arranged a night nurse. I'll expand to 24/7. Good. I'll file temporary restraining instructions on disbursements pending transfer. Expect angry calls. Do not engage materially. Direct them to me. Copy. I hung up and let the cicarders fill the space where panic should have been. The first secure email pinged. I signed with my CAC and uploaded the exhibits, tagging each one with the clean, unemotional labels the protocol required. Exhibit A, service cancellation. Exhibit B, unauthorized transfer. Exhibit C, social timestamp corroboration. By the time I walked back down the hall, I could hear Grandma breathing more evenly. The portable oxygen I'd rented hissed quietly. A home care nurse named Tanya, all gentle hands and nonsense eyes, was checking vitals, moving with the calm competence of a medic in a storm. Hydration's improving, Tanya murmured. She'll rest easier tonight. Thank you, I said, meaning it from the bones out. I tucked a sprig of garden mint into the bedside water like Grandma used to do for me after softball. My phone vibrated again. I glanced at the screen. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Dad. Decline. Tyler. Decline. Another tone. Secure message from Ms. Delgado. Asset freeze confirmed. Authority transfer in process. Beneath it, a line that almost made me smile. You expect escalation. I closed the study, reset the shelf, and locked the front door. Then I brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. On one side, I wrote care. On the other, compliance. Under care, expand coverage to 24/7, schedule geriatric consult at Memorial, stock the pantry with soft food she likes, set up a tablet with gospel playlists and old family photos, call Pastor Reed. Under compliance, bank notifications, confirmed, trust administrator, pending, insurance, notify change of agent, utilities, redirect auto pay, home security, reset codes, cancel, video conference scheduling. The last line I wrote in block capitals because it needed to land like a gavel. This is not personal. This is duty. Of course it was personal. But in my world, you do the mission first and feel it later. At 8:03 p.m., Ms. Delgado sent a calendar invite for a video conference at 10 a.m. Eastern. Participants: Delgado Lore, Trust Administrator, Daniel and Karen Morgan, Successor Agent, Captain Rachel Morgan. I stared at the invite, then at the quiet hallway where my grandmother slept under a clean quilt, the oxygen humming steady. The house felt different, less like a mausoleum, more like a perimeter someone competent was finally guarding. I set 2 alarms, cleaned the kitchen until the counter shone, and laid out the exhibits like ordnance, simple, undeniable, devastating. Tomorrow, they'd bring their outrage. I'd bring the lore. And my grandfather's signature would do the rest. Morning broke hot and heavy, the Georgia air already sticking to my skin before the sun was fully up. I'd been awake since before dawn, running through the video conference in my head like a battle drill. By 9:30 a.m., the exhibits were arranged on the desk in neat stacks, my uniform pressed to sharp edges. I wasn't wearing it for nostalgia. I wanted them to remember exactly who they were dealing with. At 9:59, I clicked into the secure meeting link. 3 windows filled my screen. In one, Daniel and Karen Morgan, crammed together in what looked like a bland hotel room, probably the cheapest one they could find after their cards stopped working. Mom's hair wasn't brushed, Dad's tan had faded to a dull, unhealthy shade. The second window showed Marisol Delgado, posture perfect, glasses catching the light, her expression unreadable. And then there was mine, me, sitting at Grandpa James's oak desk, the grain worn smooth under my hands. Dad opened fire before anyone else could speak. "Rachel, what the hell did you do? Our accounts are frozen. The bank won't talk to us. The hotel says our cards declined. We had to borrow cash from a stranger just to get dinner." I let him vent, watching without a blink, letting the fury expend itself. When he paused for breath, I leaned forward slightly. I executed Grandpa James's legal directives. You were his fiduciaries. That's not a title. It's a duty, one you abandoned. Mom's voice cracked in, high and defensive. We did not abandon her. I didn't raise my tone, but my words sliced clean. Exhibit A. With a click, I shared my screen. The first document filled the meeting view, an inverse from Magnolia Home Health. Stamped service cancelled in bright red. 2 months ago, you ended Grandma Eleanor's care. Your email to the agency says you did it to manage finances more directly. Dad opened his mouth, but I was already switching to the next tab. Exhibit B, bank transfer of $18,500 from her long-term care account to D&K Family Experiences LLC for a summer travel bundle. Mom's face blanched. Dad stared at the line item like it might rewrite itself if he glared hard enough. Then came the last blow. Exhibit C, your own public social media post, time-stamped 2:14 p.m. the day a paramedic reported Grandma was alone, dehydrated, and unresponsive for at least 6 hours. In your caption, you wrote, "Another perfect day in paradise." Silence. The kind you can feel pressing against your eardrums. Mom's eyes glistened, but there was no real grief in them, just fear. We just needed a break, as she whispered. We've worked so hard. We deserved. That was the last spark of sympathy burning in me. It went out cold. This isn't a discussion, I said, my voice low, flat. It's a notification. I gave Ms. Delgado a small nod. She cleared her throat, her tone all business. Upon documented evidence of fiduciary negligence by Daniel and Karen Morgan, all powers of attorney and control over the Eleanor J. Morgan Trust are immediately and irrevocably transferred to the successor agent, Captain Rachel Morgan, effective now. The word terminated hung in the air like a gunshot. Dad's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Mom's shoulders shook. I couldn't tell if it was crying or just the collapse of a posture she'd held her whole life. I ended the call without another word. The screen went black, leaving me with my own reflection. No triumph. No relief. Just the quiet hum of Grandma's oxygen machine from down the hall, the sound of a mission underway. The moment the call ended, I didn't give myself time to think about my parents' faces. Thinking is where hesitation creeps in. Instead, I shifted straight into action, same as I do after a briefing in country. First order of business: secure the perimeter. In this case, the perimeter was everything Grandpa James had built, from the brick house on the edge of Savannah to the last cent in the trust accounts. By noon, I'd been on the phone with the utilities, the insurance companies, and the bank's trust department. Automatic payments rerouted. All billing addresses updated to me. The home security company changed the alarm codes. I reset every password that touched the trust, banking, property tax portals, even the online account for Grandma's prescription deliveries. If my parents tried to log in, they'd find locked doors everywhere they turned. While those confirmations rolled in, I moved to the most important priority: Grandma Eleanor's care. When Tanya, the night nurse, arrived for her next shift, I sat her down at the kitchen table. "Starting today, you're here full-time," I told her. Her eyes widened. 24/7? That's going to be already approved. The trust will cover it. Then I called a geriatric care coordinator in Atlanta, a woman named Dr. Faith Collins I'd worked with on a veteran outreach project years back. She picked up on the second ring. "Rachel Morgan? Lord, I haven't heard your voice since Fallujah rehab work. What's going on?" I told her. No sugarcoating, no polite trimming of the truth, just the hard facts of neglect and the new authority in my hands. She didn't hesitate. "Text me the address. I'll have a care team there by tomorrow morning." By the time I hung up, I could feel the air in the house changing. It's a thing you notice in war zones too. When the chaos shifts and you start to regain control, even the silence sounds different. That evening, I sat in Grandma's room reading to her from an old Louis L'Amour paperback. Her eyes stayed closed, but every so often her fingers would tighten faintly around mine. When I paused to take a sip of tea, I realized it was the first time since walking through that door that my shoulders weren't locked tight. At 8:17 p.m., my phone lit up with an incoming call. Tyler. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Ratch, what's going on?" "Mom and Dad are saying you've stolen the house, the accounts, everything. They're freaking out. They want me to mediate." I almost laughed. Tyler loved playing the peacemaker, but only when there was something in it for him. "Not stolen," I said. "Transferred, under a legal authority Grandpa put in place years ago." He made a disbelieving noise. "You can't just." "I can. I have. And before you volunteer to fix this, ask yourself why they were in Cancun while Grandma was alone, dehydrated, and barely breathing." He had no answer for that. I could hear him shifting uncomfortably on the other end. "Look, I didn't know it was like that," he mumbled. "You didn't ask," I said. "Same as always." I ended the call before he could pivot into one of his guilt trip monologues. Later that night, I went back into Grandpa's study. The safe still sat open, its contents neatly stacked after my earlier inspection. Beneath the core documents, I found something else, a leather-bound notebook with his handwriting on the first page. Operational notes for a successor. It wasn't a diary. It was a field manual for running the Morgan legacy. There were entries on property maintenance schedules, vendor contacts, and even preferred suppliers for the small peach orchard out back. But there were also pages about people, who could be trusted, who couldn't, and why. In the margin beside my father's name, Grandpa had written, "Great salesman. Zero follow-through. Cannot resist shortcuts." Next to my mother's. charms her way past consequences. Needs oversight in any fiduciary role. Next to mine. Not afraid of hard work. Doesn't need applause. Will follow the mission to the end. I closed the book slowly. It wasn't praise that stuck with me. It was the quiet certainty that he'd known this day might come. And he'd prepared me for it. The next morning, the first wave of the new care team arrived. A nurse practitioner, a physical therapist, and a nutritionist. They moved through the house with brisk competence, rearranging furniture to make the bedroom safer, adjusting the bed height, setting up a hydration schedule. Within an hour, the place looked less like a neglected backroom and more like a proper care space. While they worked, I took a call from Ms. Delgado. The trust transfer is complete, as she said. Your parents no longer have legal access to any assets tied to Eleanor J. Morgan. Any chance they can challenge it? Not successfully. Your grandfather's documentation is airtight. That's the beauty of doing it before death, not after. Her voice softened slightly. Rachel, you're doing the right thing. I hung up, staring out the window at the peach trees. Maybe I was. But right now, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like standing watch. 2 days after the transfer became official, the first sign of desperation arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "We need to talk, sent from Dad's email, but I could hear Mom's phrasing in it. I didn't open it right away. In the army, you learn not to rush to a blinking comm signal. First, you secure your position, confirm your assets, and make sure the other side can't flank you. Only then do you answer. Instead, I walked through the house, checking on Grandma Eleanor. She was propped up in bed, hair freshly brushed, a light quilt tucked neatly around her legs. Tanya was reading her the day's scripture in a voice so soft it almost blended with the hum of the oxygen machine. The transformation in just 48 hours was staggering, her color warmer, her breathing stronger. I stepped into the hall before I allowed myself to smile. By mid-morning, the care team had rotated in and out, each one leaving behind notes and updates like we were running a forward operating base. The physical therapist recommended a schedule of light exercises. The nutritionist left a new meal plan taped to the fridge. Even the visiting chaplain took me aside to say, as she knows she's not alone anymore. That's half the battle. After lunch, I finally opened the email from Dad. It started with bluster. Rachel, this entire thing is a huge overreaction. Your mother and I have always acted in Eleanor's best interest. The vacation was planned months in advance, and we had arrangements in place. I don't know what stories you've been telling yourself, but you need to reverse whatever you've done immediately before it causes lasting damage to the family. Then, 2 sentences later, the tone shifted. We're having trouble accessing some of our personal accounts. Can you at least unfreeze those? We can't even pay the hotel bill right now. I closed the laptop without replying. Grandpa's notebook had a section labeled Engagement Protocols. The first rule, do not negotiate with someone who thinks they still hold the high ground. That evening, I got a text from Tyler. They're saying you've gone too far. Dad's humiliated. Mom's crying all the time. Are you sure this is what Grandpa wanted? I typed back 1 sentence. I'm sure this is what Grandma needs. No reply. The following morning, Ms. Delgado called. They've retained counsel, she said, her voice steady but edged. A mid-tier firm in Atlanta. The letter claims wrongful seizure of assets and emotional distress. Do they have a case? I asked. She almost laughed. Not even close. But it's a signal. They're not ready to admit defeat. That suited me fine. In operations, a desperate adversary is predictable. They always overplay their hand. The next week was a blur of logistics. I had the roof inspected, a new vac unit installed, and the peeling exterior paint stripped and redone. The trust covered all of it, but I tracked every inverse like I was reporting to a commanding officer. If this ever ended up in front of a judge, there would be zero question that every dollar went to maintaining the estate and protecting its primary beneficiary. Still, late at night, I caught myself staring at the ceiling, wondering when the personal cost of this mission would start to show. It's one thing to execute orders in a war zone. It's another when the battlefield is your own bloodline. On the 8th day, the phone rang. Not the cell, the old landline in Grandpa's study. When I answered, I heard my mother's voice, small but sharp. Rachel. I'm sorry. It caught me off guard, though I didn't let it show. For what? I asked. For not understanding how much work you've done for her. For thinking you were just being controlling. I stayed quiet, waiting. But you have to see it from our side, she continued quickly. We've had so much stress lately. Tyler's business isn't doing well, and there it was. The pivot. The plea wrapped in an apology. I can't discuss your finances, I said evenly. This is about Grandma. Her voice tightened. So that's it? You're just cutting us off? I'm fulfilling Grandpa's directives, I said. And right now, that means keeping you out of the chain of command. She didn't respond. When the line went dead, I realized my hands were steady on the receiver. No shaking, no adrenaline spike. Just resolve. That night, Tanya found me in the kitchen going over the Trust's quarterly reports. You know, as she said, most people wouldn't go this far. Not for an elderly parent, and definitely not for a grandparent. I shrugged. Most people didn't have a grandfather who taught them that a promise is more important than a paycheck. She smiled. Then I guess your grandmother's one of the lucky ones. Maybe she was. Or maybe I was, lucky enough to have a mission clear enough to keep me from looking back. By the 3rd week, the house no longer felt like the same place I'd walked into that first night. The air was fresher, the curtains open, the faint scent of lemon oil replacing the stale mustiness. Grandma Eleanor's room looked less like a sickbed and more like a living space, a small table for her tea, framed photos of fishing trips, her wedding portrait with Grandpa James in uniform. The trust was running like a disciplined unit now. Every expenditure logged, every care update documented. It was as if my years in civil affairs had been training for this, rebuilding not a city, but a legacy. One evening, while sorting through Grandpa's operational notebook, I found a page I'd missed before. At the top, in bold ink, if there's anything left over. Below it, a simple list of ideas: scholarships for service members' kids, a fund for veterans' housing repairs, legal aid for families of deployed troops. He hadn't just been thinking about our family, he'd been thinking about the kind of footprint he wanted to leave. The thought stuck with me. I'd been so focused on holding the line here that I hadn't looked beyond the perimeter. But maybe the best way to honor him wasn't just to protect the trust, it was to put it to work. That weekend, I drove into Savannah to meet with David Lee, a retired Command Sergeant Major who ran a small non-profit for veterans. We sat in a diner over black coffee and grits, and I laid out my idea, a foundation in Grandpa and Grandma's names, focused on protecting elderly relatives of deployed service members from neglect and financial exploitation. David leaned back, studying me. "You'd be taking a personal fight and scaling it up," he said. "That's dangerous. But it's also, or exactly what's needed. You've got resources, you've got the network, and you've got fire in the belly." He put me in touch with Angela Torres, a pro bono lawyer who specialized in elder law, and Dr. Monica Patel, a geriatric care consultant. Within days, the three of us was sketching the bones of what would become the James and Eleanor Morgan Foundation. Meanwhile, the reports from Ms. Delgado confirmed my parents' legal resistance was crumbling. Their Atlanta lawyers had withdrawn, citing a client noncompliance. Translation: Mom and Dad had refused to follow advice, probably insisting that outrage was a substitute for evidence. Still, I knew they weren't done. A cornered opponent doesn't always retreat. Sometimes they just change tactics. Sure enough, Tyler called one night, his voice low and urgent. "Ratch, they're talking about going to the media. Saying you're abusing the trust for personal gain." I let out a short laugh. Let them. Every cent is documented. And if they go public, I'll go public, with the invoices, the transfers, the paramedic report. He sighed. "I don't want this to get uglier." "It already is," I said, and hung up. The next morning, I stood at the foot of Grandma's bed and told her about the foundation. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gave me the faintest smile. "You always were the one to do the right thing, even if it wasn't easy," she whispered. It was the first full sentence I'd heard from her in weeks. That moment solidified everything. This wasn't just about a legal win or a family reckoning anymore. It was about building something that would last long after we were all gone. By the end of the month, the foundation's paperwork was filed. I'd set aside an initial $500,000 from the Trust's discretionary fund, earmarked for emergency elder care grants and legal defense for service families. David agreed to serve as board chair, Angela as legal counsel, and Dr. Patel as her care coordinator. And just like that, the mission was no longer mine alone. Of course, my parents couldn't ignore that shift. A week later, Ms. Delgado forwarded me a short email from Mom. "Rachel, we heard about their foundation. I guess this is your way of making yourself look like the hero. Congratulations. You've officially replaced your family with strangers." I read it twice, then archived it without responding. If she thought that was an insult, she didn't understand me at all. Winter came early that year, the kind that slipped into your bones before Thanksgiving. The peach trees in the backyard had dropped their leaves, leaving bare branches scratching at the cold air. Inside, the house was warm, humming with the quiet rhythm of a well-run operation. Oxygen pump, kettle on the stove, Tanya's footsteps padding between the kitchen and Grandma's room. By then, Grandma Eleanor's decline was gentle but steady. She slept more, spoke less, but her eyes still found mine when I came in each morning. Sometimes I'd sit beside her and read aloud from Grandpa's notebook, not the legal parts, but the little notes he'd left about fishing trips, road maps, and his favorite barbecue joints in North Carolina. It made her lips twitch upward, the faintest ghost of a smile. One night, around 3 a.m., Tanya knocked softly on my door. "She's asking for you," she said. I pulled on a sweatshirt and went to her room. Grandma's hand was small and cool in mine. Her voice was barely a whisper. You kept your promise. I had good training, I said, smiling through the tightness in my throat. She squeezed my fingers once, then closed her eyes again. That was the last time she spoke to me. She passed 3 days later, just before sunrise. The house felt impossibly still, but not like that first day I'd come home. This was a clean, peaceful quiet, the kind that follows a duty fulfilled. I handled the arrangements myself. A small service at her church, no flashy displays, just her favourite hymns and a photo of her and Grandpa laughing on the dock at Tybee Island. Tyler came, standing awkwardly at the back. My parents didn't. Whether it was shame or stubbornness that kept them away, I didn't waste the energy to guess. 2 weeks later, I was in Ms. Delgado's office, signing the final probate documents. The scent of leather and paper reminded me of Grandpa's study. When the last signature was in place, Ms. Delgado slid the folder toward me. That's it, as she said. You are now the sole steward of the Morgan estate. The words landed heavier than I expected. Not as a weight of ownership, but as the full measure of responsibility. I wasn't inheriting a pile of assets. I was inheriting the duty to see them used the way Grandpa intended. My first act was to list the house for sale. It was beautiful, but it had been my parents' stage, a backdrop for the image they projected. I had no interest in living inside their echo. The proceeds went straight into the James and Eleanor Morgan Foundation. In less than a month, we'd already funded emergency in-home care for a retired sailor's mother in Oregon and provided legal aid to an Air Force family fighting a predatory landlord. The mission was moving, breathing, growing. One afternoon, while I was reviewing a case file in the Foundation's small office, an email notification popped up. The sender, Karen Morgan. The subject, Rachel. I hesitated, then opened it. I'm sorry. We have nothing. No explanation. No request. Just 6 words. I waited for something to rise in me. Anger, pity, maybe the dull satisfaction of victory. But there was nothing. It was like reading a weather report for a place I'd never visit again. I archived the email without replying. That night, I walked through the quiet halls of the house one last time before the sale closed. The furniture was gone, the walls bare, but I could still picture Grandma's quilt on the bed, the smell of her peach cobbler cooling in the kitchen. Those were the things worth carrying forward, and they didn't need for walls to survive. I locked the door, turned in the key, and didn't look back. The Foundation's first spring was busy enough that I barely noticed the passing months. Our office was nothing glamorous, 2 rooms over a used bookstore downtown, but the phone stayed busy, the case files stacked up, and the mission kept pushing forward. I'd swapped the sound of my grandmother's oxygen pump for the click of keyboards and the murmur of strategy meetings. Some nights I stayed late, reviewing grant applications under the soft hum of the desk lamp. It was work that didn't care about last names or family politics, just facts, needs, and results. One Friday afternoon, a volunteer dropped a stack of envelopes on my desk. Mostly bills and thank you notes. But halfway down, I saw another familiar return address, Daniel and Karen Morgan. For a moment, I considered tossing it unopened into the shred bin. Instead, I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Rachel, we heard about the families you're helping. I suppose that's something to be proud of. We don't expect you to forgive us. Just know we're trying to start over. Mom and Dad. I stared at the words for a long moment, then folded the paper neatly back into the envelope. No rush of relief, no renewed anger. Just a calm understanding that whatever they were trying to rebuild, it wasn't mine to be part of. I filed the letter in the same cabinet where I kept the trust's closed cases, not out of sentiment, but because the story belonged there now, completed, documented, done. That weekend, I drove out to Tybee Island at dawn, the way Grandpa used to. The pier was empty except for a few early fishermen. I walked to the end, leaned against the rail, and let the wind off the Atlantic cut through me. Grandpa had always said the ocean was the best place to clear your head because it didn't care about your troubles. Standing there, I realized my internal ledger, the one I'd been keeping since I was a kid, tallying every slight, every dismissal, was finally blank. Not because my parents had changed, or because I'd forced them to admit they were wrong, but because their chapter in my life was over, and I wasn't carrying it forward. When I got back to the office on Monday, there was a new case file on my desk. A young army sergeant in Kuwait had written in, worried about his widowed father back home in Kansas. Neighbors had reported signs of neglect, and a local relative was draining his bank account. I picked up the phone, my voice steady as I introduced myself to the sergeant. "We'll handle it. You focus on your mission. We'll take care of him here." As I hung up, I thought about Grandma Eleanor, about the promise I'd made in the quiet of her room, the night I'd found her water just out of reach. It wasn't just a vow to her anymore. It was the Foundation's creed. That evening, David Lee stuck his head into my office. "We've got board approval for the next funding round," he said. "Looks like we'll be able to take on 3 more families this quarter." I nodded, already reaching for the next file. The work didn't stop.